Hey everybody, welcome to the WOFOYO podcast with C-Dub and Bones. And Bones, let me tell you what a great day to be born again and a heterosexual. We're going to get in the Word. We're going to talk about snakes and grace today for our scripture reference. Let's get in the Word for ourselves. Acts chapter 28, starting at the beginning, verse 1. After we were brought safely through, we then learned that the island was called Malta. The native people showed us an unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire and welcomed us all because it had begun to rain and was cold. When Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and put them on the fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened on his hand. When the native people saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, "No doubt this man is a murderer. Though he has escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live." He, however, shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no harm. They were waiting for him to swell up or suddenly fall down dead. But when they had waited a long time and saw no misfortune come to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. Here's an interesting thing, and there's a couple points I want to bring out on this. First of all, Paul's an apostle. Paul ain't afraid to work, number one.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, when it's time to stack wood, add to the fire, Paul is not above doing that. He's not above manual labor. Some to think wasn't above making tents either. And so for a lot of us, we want to have our titles, we want to have our accolades, and rather than do that, sometimes the best thing to do is simply to do the work. But there was something that stood out. What the natives say, because the natives get it partially right.
Hmm.
The natives key in on something. When he shakes the snake off and throws it into the fire, they say to one another, "No doubt this man is a murderer." So that part is right. Was Paul an accessory to murder? Did he incite people to commit murder?
Did.
Yes, he did. At least Stephen, at least, if
Mm-hmm.
not more. But the one that is recorded is Stephen. Was Paul a persecutor of the church? Saul of Tarsus. When he was Saul of Tarsus, he absolutely was. So, in this aspect, they got the justice part of it pegged to a degree. However, they're overlooking something. Though he has escaped from the sea, which is true, justice has not allowed him to live. That part is incorrect. Why is it incorrect? Because of grace. And so Paul doesn't swell up. Paul doesn't fall over dead. And I've heard all sorts of theories. There's the Malta viper, and there's all this, and the people from Malta worshiped the deity that represented justice. Yeah, maybe, maybe not. Don't know. Didn't read it. Heard a lot of preachers say different things. Didn't research it. But what I see here is that they are able to pick up that that Saul of Tarsus was indeed a murderer. However, where sin abounds, grace much more abounds.
I like the fact that he goes from he's a murderer and being judged to okay, now let's bring everybody. Let's bring all their sick people to him. Maybe he's not a murderer. He's being judged. 180-degree flip flop there,
Yeah.
which, like you say, they weren't wrong, but they were smart enough to realize what they thought was judgment or justice in the beginning. Quickly after it is, I think they recognized it was probably grace, or at least something other than judgment. The snake bit him and didn't do him any harm, and they thought he was a god of some sort. They recognized the difference between the two.
Yeah.
We have a hard time doing that sometimes. I think it's interesting too. Paul was delivered from the sea
Mm-hmm.
because there's some spiritual symbology here if we wanted to see it. Because the sea oftentimes represents chaos and turmoil in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So we see Paul being delivered from chaos and turmoil of the world, or those worldly things, which he was. We see him as Saul of Tarsus being delivered from all of that and being transformed into Paul the Apostle. There is this spiritual picture here of him coming out of that turmoil and worldly thing, and then of course doing the spiritual work that we see there, the revival that you talk about. Sometimes when we're going through our own chaos and our own torments and stuff like that, it's good to know what some of these things mean, because oftentimes God will take us into the Scripture and
Mm-hmm.
have us read passages of Scripture, and if we're unaware and we don't really know what some of these things are, when it comes down to symbology, pictures, types, shadows, colors, and stuff like that, it can be very difficult to understand what God's trying to tell us in our own circumstance.
Yeah.
If it were me going through a hard time in my own life, and I found myself in this part of Scripture reading about Paul being delivered from the sea and meeting with these people, that would give me comfort and solace, because I would immediately recognize that as God trying to show
Yeah.
me that, hey, yeah, I'm bringing you out of some chaos. I'm bringing you out of it.